I am Julian. I am 28 years old. Exactly 2 weeks before I was supposed to stand at the altar and say my vows, my fiancé dumped me for my own older brother. And as if that was not enough to completely shatter my reality, my parents threw me out of my own apartment that very same day to make room for their new, shiny golden couple. While I was standing on the curb with a single duffel bag to my name, my own mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Try not to embarrass the family with a scene, Julian. Sebastian has an executive image to maintain now, and we cannot afford your drama ruining his reputation." They humiliated me right out in the open, treating me like a stray dog they deeply regretted feeding. But there is one massive thing they did not know. The desperate, live-in nursing job I took just to keep a roof over my head and avoid sleeping on a park bench put me directly in the center of their shady, multi-million-dollar corporate takeover scheme. And today, the very people who threw me out like yesterday's trash are the ones crying, panicking, and begging me for a shred of mercy. Before I tell you exactly how I took absolutely everything from them, hit that like button if you believe in karma and justice. And please, do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one, and knowing where my audience is from truly keeps me going. Now, let's go back to the exact moment where this massive storm actually started. It was my 5th night living at the Cypress Hill estate. The weather outside was absolutely brutal. The wind was howling off the California coast, rattling the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the mansion like some invisible force was trying to break its way in. I could not sleep. I had been tossing and turning in my small, sterile room in the staff quarters for hours. My mind was racing, replaying every single terrible moment of the past 2 weeks. The silence of that massive, cold house was incredibly heavy, pressed down on my chest, reminding me of how utterly alone I was in the world. I decided to get out of bed to grab a glass of water from the main kitchen, padding softly down the long, dark, marble hallway in my socks. The stone floor was freezing against my feet, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of my own anxiety. That is when I saw it. A thin, sharp sliver of light was spilling out from beneath the heavy double doors of the West Wing gym. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart did a strange, hard flutter against my ribs. That gym was strictly off-limits. Beatrice, the terrifying estate manager who had hired me, made it crystal clear on day 1 that nobody on the staff ever went into the West Wing without explicit permission. She had handed me a 50-page manual outlining every single rule of the house, and breaching the West Wing uninvited was grounds for immediate termination without salary. More importantly, the only other person living on this entire floor was my patient, Serena. Serena was a tech billionaire. She was a woman who had built an absolute empire from the ground up, a software company that revolutionized corporate data security. She was fiercely independent, brilliant, and untouchable. But 6 months ago, her perfect life was derailed by a catastrophic car accident. I had read her medical files front to back when I accepted this job. I analyzed the MRI scans, the surgical notes, the grim prognosis. The reports from the top neurologists in the country were crystal clear and completely devastating. Severe spinal trauma, paralyzed from the waist down. She was confined to a sleek, custom-built wheelchair, and she was incredibly bitter and angry at the world. She had fired 3 highly qualified nurses before me in a matter of weeks. The medical staffing agency warned me she was an absolute nightmare to deal with. I was just supposed to be the next guy in line to take her daily verbal abuse in exchange for a hefty salary that I desperately needed to rebuild my completely shattered life. So, who in the world was in the gym at 3 in the morning? I pushed the heavy oak door open just a crack, moving as silently as humanly possible. I held my breath, terrified of what I might find. I looked through the gap, and my breath caught sharply in my throat. I completely froze in shock. My brain simply could not process what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't a burglar looking for expensive equipment to steal. It wasn't a rogue member of the night staff breaking the rules. It was Serena. She was entirely out of her wheelchair. The expensive chair was parked a few feet away, discarded like a useless piece of metal. Serena was standing in the center of the room, gripping a set of steel parallel physical therapy bars. Her knuckles were bone white from the sheer force of her grip, her veins popping against her pale skin. Sweat was pouring down her face, soaking the collar of her gray athletic shirt, making it cling to her frail frame. Her arms were shaking violently under the massive strain of holding her own body weight, but she was standing upright. Her legs, the very same legs the top doctors in the state confidently said would never function again, were trembling uncontrollably. They were locked in a brutal, agonizing battle against gravity. I watched in absolute, paralyzed awe as she took a step. It was just one tiny, dragging, excruciating step. But it was real. She was moving. I was so stunned that I unconsciously shifted my weight, and my foot pressed down hard on a loose wooden floorboard just outside the door frame. It let out a sharp, piercing creak that echoed through the cavernous gym like a gunshot. Serena's head snapped toward the door instantly. The absolute raw determination on her face shattered in a millisecond, replaced by sheer panic, and then a blinding, terrifying rage. The sudden movement broke her intense focus. Her arms gave out completely. She lost her grip on the steel bars and collapsed hard onto the padded floor, letting out a sharp gasp of pain as her knees hit the mat. I rushed into the room on pure medical instinct to help her, dropping to my knees beside her. I reached out to check her vitals, to make sure she hadn't fractured anything in the fall. But before I could even brush her shoulder, she threw her hand up, blocking me violently. Her voice was like cracking ice, venomous and sharp, echoing in the large room. "Get out," she hissed, her chest heaving as she glared at me with eyes full of absolute fire. "Do not touch me, Julian. Get out of this room right now." I stopped a few feet away, keeping my hands raised in the air to show I was not a threat. I fully expected her to fire me on the spot. I expected her to reach for the emergency call button around her neck and scream for Beatrice to have the private security team throw me off the property. I braced myself for the verbal lashing of a lifetime. But as I looked down at this incredibly powerful, wealthy woman, hiding her miraculous progress, fighting her painful battle in the dead of night, just so nobody would see her struggle, a massive shift happened inside me. I did not see a cold, calculating billionaire anymore. I saw a human being who was absolutely terrified of being vulnerable in front of people who might use her weakness against her. Before she could yell at me again, my mind dragged me violently back to the reason I was standing in this lonely, isolated room in the first place. The memory of my own destruction hit me so hard I almost lost my physical balance. Because looking at Serena's desperate, guarded eyes, I knew exactly what it felt like to be surrounded by people you fundamentally could not trust. I knew what it was like to fight a battle completely alone while everyone around you waited for you to fail. Just 2 weeks before that intense night in the gym, my life looked entirely different. It was a perfectly sunny Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting in a crowded, overpriced coffee shop downtown. Soft jazz was playing over the overhead speakers, mixing with the chatter of businessmen and students. The warm smell of roasted espresso and expensive French pastries was hanging heavily in the air. I was completely exhausted from pulling a double shift at the physical therapy clinic where I worked, my muscles aching from lifting patients all day, but I was genuinely happy. I was meeting Clara, my fiancée. We were exactly 16 days away from our wedding. I had practically drained every single penny of my savings to pay the final deposit for the caterer that morning. I had worked overtime for 9 straight months to afford the diamond ring sitting on her finger, taking every weekend shift and holiday coverage just to give her the wedding she always dreamed of. I was ready to start a family, to finally have a home of my own, a place where I actually belonged. I sat down at the small corner table holding 2 hot lattes. Clara didn't look up from her phone when I sat down. She didn't smile. She was wearing a brand new, highly expensive designer trench coat I had never seen before. I immediately noticed it because Clara complained about our tight budget constantly. Slowly, she reached into her expensive leather purse, pulled out the familiar velvet box containing the ring I bought her, and slid it directly across the wooden table until it hit my coffee cup with a dull thud. "We need to talk, Julian," she said. Her voice was completely flat, rehearsed, cold. There was no emotion in her eyes at all. "I can't marry you. My stomach dropped straight into my shoes. The ambient noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade into a dull, high-pitched ringing sound in my ears. I thought it was a terrible joke or maybe pre-wedding jitters. I leaned in and asked her if she was stressed about the wedding planning, or if we needed to downsize the guest list to save money. I offered to take on a third job if it meant easing her mind. "It's not the wedding," she said, finally looking me directly in the eye. There was no sadness in her expression, only deep annoyance. Like I was a chore she was finally crossing off her list. "It's you. It is this life. We are just going in completely different directions. I need stability, Julian. I need a real future. And I have found someone who can actually give that to me. Someone who actually has a path to real success, instead of just wiping down equipment at a clinic for an hourly wage." I stared at her, trying desperately to process the incredibly cruel words coming out of the mouth of the woman I loved. "Who?" I asked, my voice cracking, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Clara didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She lifted her chin defiantly, looking almost proud of her betrayal. "Sebastian. Sebastian. My older brother. The family's golden child. The one who got the massive, fully funded college fund while I had to take out crushing student loans just to get a basic degree. The one who was handed a high-level executive position at my father's lucrative investment firm right out of business school, while I fought tooth and nail for a basic salary in healthcare. Sebastian always got whatever he wanted. He got the luxury cars, the endless praise at Thanksgiving dinners, the massive trust funds. And now he wanted my fiancée. He is about to make senior partner, Julian," Clara justified, speaking to me as if his bank account made her absolute betrayal perfectly logical and acceptable. "He has massive connections. He is buying prime commercial real estate. It just makes financial sense for me. You have to understand that. You can't give me the life I deserve. Sebastian can." I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table or cause a massive public scene. I just felt a cold, hollow, sickening numbness spread through my chest, freezing my lungs. I took the velvet ring box, stood up from the table, and walked out of the coffee shop into the busy street. I bumped into people on the sidewalk, entirely numb. I thought the worst part of my life was over. I thought nothing could hurt more than that conversation. I was completely, horribly wrong. When I finally made it back to the apartment I had lived in for 3 years, a nice apartment in the city center that was technically owned by my parents' massive real estate portfolio, I found the front door unlocked. I pushed it open and walked inside to find my mother, Diana, standing in the middle of the living room. Next to her were 4 large, neatly packed suitcases. "My suitcases. What is going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, looking at the bare walls where my pictures used to hang. Diana didn't even flinch when she saw my pale, devastated face. She picked up a lint roller and casually ran it over her expensive cashmere sweater. "Clara called me. She told me the news about the cancellation of the wedding. Honestly, Julian, it is for the best. I always told your father you two were never a good match. Sebastian is much better suited to provide for her lifestyle. She needs someone ambitious." "You are packing my bags?" I asked, completely utterly bewildered, staring at my entire life boxed up by the front door. "Because my own brother stole my fiancée, you are kicking me out onto the street?" "Oh, please do not be dramatic, Julian. It is exhausting," she scoffed, rolling her eyes and checking her manicured nails. "Sebastian and Clara need a place to live together while their new suburban house is being completely renovated. This apartment is much closer to the investment firm. It just makes logistical sense for his morning commute. You need to vacate today. I already canceled your building keycard." I felt the air get violently sucked out of my lungs. I was the victim here, yet I was the one being punished and erased. I was being thrown away like garbage just to make things slightly more convenient for the son they actually loved and respected. It was the ultimate betrayal from the woman who gave birth to me. Just then, my cell phone rang loudly in my pocket. It was Victor, my father. I answered it, desperately hoping for a single shred of sanity or parental protection. "Listen to me very carefully, Julian." Victor's deep, authoritative voice boomed through the receiver, entirely devoid of any warmth. I do not want any drama today. Sebastian is closing a massive corporate acquisition deal this month, and his public image needs to be flawless. Hand over the keys to your mother and leave the premises quietly. Do not make a scene in the lobby. It is bad for business. If you act up or try to drag your brother's name through the mud, I will personally make sure you don't see a single dime of your inheritance, and I will hit you with a lawsuit for the back rent you technically owe on that apartment. Do not test me. Inheritance? Lawsuit? What an absolute joke. They had already given everything of value to Sebastian. I hung up the phone without saying a word. I grabbed the handles of my heavy bags. I didn't say a single word to my mother as I walked out the door forever. I dragged my luggage down to the sidewalk, feeling like a complete ghost in my own life. Just as I got to the curb, a brand new, silver Porsche pulled up right in front of me. The tinted window rolled down smoothly. Sebastian was sitting in the driver's seat, wearing a custom-tailored suit, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. Clara was sitting right there in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, refusing to even look in my direction. Need a ride to a cheap motel, little brother? Sebastian sneered, revving the engine slightly, mocking my misery. I gripped the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. I turned my back to them and walked down the street without looking back. I had less than $200 in my checking account. I was a 28-year-old man who was about to spend the night sleeping on a public park bench. In pure, unadulterated desperation, I called Fiona. Fiona was a tough, no-nonsense senior nurse I used to work with at the main city hospital before I moved to the private clinic. She took pity on me and let me crash on her tiny apartment couch for 2 nights. When I broke down and told her I needed a job immediately, something that provided housing and fast cash, she rummaged through her heavy purse and handed me a thick, black business card with gold lettering. Private care, Fiona said, pouring me a cup of cheap black coffee. Live-in requirement. The pay is absolutely insane, Julian. We are talking high 5 figures a month. But the patient is a nightmare. Some tech billionaire up in Cypress Hill. She got paralyzed in a terrible wreck, and she hates the entire world. She chewed up and spit out the last 3 nurses from our agency in less than a month. They all quit crying. But if you have a high tolerance for pain and you can keep your mouth shut, it pays cash, and you get a private suite to live in. I had absolutely nothing left to lose. My pride was already completely destroyed. I took the commuter bus up the winding, foggy roads to Cypress Hill the very next morning. The mansion looked like a massive modern fortress made of glass, steel, and cold gray stone, built right into the side of a jagged cliff overlooking the crashing ocean. I was interviewed by Beatrice, the strict, sharply dressed estate manager. She looked over my medical credentials with a deep scowl, asked me 3 incredibly blunt questions about my physical stamina, and then laid out the brutal ground rules. No visitors. Ever. Complete discretion is mandated by an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Round-the-clock availability. You will not speak to the press. You will not take photographs. And you will absolutely not take her insults personally, Beatrice stated coldly. I signed the massive contract without reading the fine print. I thought this isolated, gloomy mansion would be a quiet place to hide from the world and heal my fresh wounds. I thought I was just taking a demanding medical job to survive and save some money. I had absolutely no idea I was walking straight into a vicious corporate war zone that was secretly tied directly to my own toxic family. I said, "Get out." Serena yelled again, her voice cracking slightly, snapping me violently back to the present moment in the dimly lit gym. She was still sitting on the floor mats, breathing heavily, trying desperately to pull her dead weight back up into her custom wheelchair. Her arms were shaking violently from the exertion. I didn't leave. I completely ignored her direct order. I walked over, firmly planted my feet on the mat, and offered her my arm for support. She glared at me, her eyes cutting right through me like sharp daggers. But after a long, incredibly tense moment of silence, she took it. I hauled her up, using proper lifting mechanics, and safely secured her back into her chair. "You are going to report this to Beatrice in the morning," Serena said bitterly, refusing to look at me as she adjusted her shirt, her chest still heaving. You are going to tell everyone on the medical board that I am taking reckless risks and violating my therapy protocols. Why are you hiding it? I asked quietly, keeping my voice entirely neutral and professional. She gripped the armrests of her chair until her knuckles popped loudly in the quiet room. Because the minute people see progress, Julian, they expect absolute miracles. They expect the old me to return instantly. And when I inevitably fall, when I fail to run a marathon, they look at me with overwhelming pity. I do not do pity. My investors do not do pity. If my board of directors thinks I am struggling to even stand on my own 2 feet, they will smell blood in the water. They want me weak. They want to push me out of the company I built from nothing. I looked at her. I really looked at her. Past the billions of dollars, past the massive mansion and the expensive clothes. I saw the exact same brutal betrayal and deep fear in her eyes that I had felt standing on the curb with my luggage while my family laughed at me. I am not going to tell anyone, I said firmly. But you are doing this completely wrong. Your posture on those bars is terrible, and if you keep throwing your weight forward like that, you are going to tear a rotator cuff. If you actually want to walk again, you need proper physical therapy. You need a medical spotter you can actually trust. Serena looked up at me, genuinely surprised. The thick, icy wall around her cracked just a tiny fraction. Why would you help me? I have been nothing but absolutely awful to you since you got here. Because I know exactly what it is like to have the people closest to you waiting for you to fail, so they can take your place. I replied, my voice hard with conviction. From that night on, we forged a deep, secret pact. Every single morning at 3 a.m., long before the kitchen staff arrived and while the mansion was dead silent, I would take her down to the gym. I pushed her to her absolute physical limits. She screamed at me. She cried out in pain. She cursed my name. But she never once quit. And slowly, day by day, the bitter, cold billionaire melted away, leaving behind an incredibly fierce, resilient woman. We started talking during the sessions. I learned about her company, her vision for the future, her constant struggles with greedy executives. But the real storm, the one that would completely change both of our lives forever, broke 3 days later. It was a gloomy Tuesday afternoon. Serena was in the main living room, sitting in her wheelchair by the massive stone fireplace, reviewing complicated financial spreadsheets on her tablet. 2 visitors had arrived at the front gate entirely unannounced. One was Nathaniel, her longtime business partner and the co-founder of her tech company. The other was Valerie, Serena's younger cousin, who always hovered around acting overly concerned while secretly judging everything in the house and reporting back to the board. I was standing quietly in the corner near the wet bar, organizing Serena's afternoon medication tray, doing my exact job of blending seamlessly into the wallpaper. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly toxic and heavy. Nathaniel was pacing back and forth across the expensive Persian rug, holding a thick leather folder. He wore a sharp, custom Italian suit and a perfectly practiced smile that absolutely did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. Serena, you have to be reasonable about this, Nathaniel said smoothly, his voice dripping with fake, sickening concern. The stock is taking a massive hit this quarter. The board of directors is getting incredibly nervous about your absence. You haven't been into the office in 6 months. The investors need to know that someone physically capable is steering the ship. They need a strong public face to maintain confidence. I am steering the ship, Nathaniel, Serena snapped, not looking up from her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. I work remotely 12 hours a day. I closed the Tokyo expansion deal last week from this exact chair. Valerie chimed in, walking over and placing a perfectly manicured hand on Serena's tense shoulder. Oh, sweetie, you look so incredibly exhausted. Look at the dark bags under your eyes. Your health simply has to come first. You need to rest and heal properly. Absolutely no one blames you for stepping back. It is just a temporary power of attorney document. Let Nathaniel handle the massive corporate stress while you focus completely on your medical treatments. I watched Serena's jaw clench tightly, They weren't asking her to rest. They were trying to sideline her entirely. They were trying to completely strip her of her legal power. Nathaniel slid the heavy leather folder onto the glass coffee table, opened it to a signature page loaded with legal jargon, and handed her a heavy gold pen. "Just sign the proxy, Serena. For the good of the company and your own health," he pressured, leaning over her aggressively. Serena looked down at the pen. I saw her hand trembling slightly from the immense psychological stress and the severe physical toll of her secret morning workouts. I saw her falter for a split second. I saw the deep exhaustion weighing her down, making her second-guess her own incredible strength. I absolutely could not let it happen. I grabbed a tall glass from the bar and filled it to the brim with ice water. I walked forward quickly, maintaining a blank expression. As I leaned over the glass coffee table to place the drink down, I intentionally, but very subtly, twisted my wrist. The glass tipped forward. Ice and water spilled completely over the leather folder, instantly soaking the critical legal documents inside and entirely ruining the ink. "Oh, my deepest apologies, Miss Serena," I said loudly, keeping my facial expression perfectly blank and highly professional. "I must have completely lost my grip. Please let me get some towels to clean this terrible mess up." Nathaniel cursed loudly, snatching the dripping, ruined papers away from the table, water splashing onto his expensive shoes. "Are you completely blind, you clumsy idiot?" he snapped at me, his face turning bright red with intense anger. "Accidents happen, Nathaniel. He is just a nurse," Serena said, a sudden brilliant spark returning to her tired eyes. She looked up at me, a tiny, almost invisible smirk playing on her lips. She understood exactly what I had just done. "I guess I cannot legally sign those documents today. Bring me fresh copies next week. Now, if you will excuse me, I need my afternoon physical therapy session." Nathaniel slammed the wet folder shut and stormed out of the room, absolutely furious. Valerie trailed closely behind him like an obedient lapdog, shooting me a disgustingly dirty look. I followed them out into the grand hallway, pretending to carry the wet towels away, just to make sure they actually left the property. As they walked toward the massive front foyer, Nathaniel's cell phone rang in his suit pocket. He stopped dead in the hallway and answered it. He had no idea I was standing right behind the giant marble pillar, completely hidden from his view. "Yeah, she didn't sign the damn proxy," Nathaniel hissed angrily into the phone. "The stupid nurse ruined the documents with a glass of water. It doesn't matter. The emergency board meeting is in 4 days. We will initiate a vote of no confidence to remove her entirely on medical grounds. She won't be able to fight it." Nathaniel paused, listening intently to the person on the other end of the line. "I don't care how you structure the shell company," Nathaniel continued, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, "as long as the funding goes through on time. Does Victor have the capital ready for the buyout?" My heart completely stopped beating. "Victor, my father. Tell Victor the commercial real estate assets will be transferred directly to his portfolio as soon as I take the CEO chair," Nathaniel said smoothly. "And make absolutely sure Sebastian signs the proxy agreements by Friday morning. I do not want any slip-ups on your family's end." He hung up the phone, shoved it into his pocket, and walked out the front door into the pouring rain. I stood behind that cold marble pillar, entirely paralyzed, completely unable to breathe. The air in the hallway suddenly felt freezing cold. My own flesh and blood. My father, Victor. My brother, Sebastian. They were the financial muscle secretly backing Nathaniel's hostile takeover of Serena's company. They were orchestrating a massive corporate coup to steal her life's work, just like they had stolen my apartment, my fiancé, and my future. They wanted a war. They thought they had successfully discarded a weak, useless son. They thought I was gone forever, completely erased from their perfect lives. They had absolutely no idea they had just placed me directly behind enemy lines. I didn't wait a single second. I marched straight back into the living room. Serena was staring out the large window at the rain, her shoulders slumped in temporary defeat. "They are going to vote me out on Friday," she said quietly, tracing a finger over the armrest of her wheelchair. Nathaniel has half the board in his pocket. Without that proxy, he is going to claim I am mentally and physically unfit to lead. He will take everything I built. Not if you fight back, I said, my voice hard and entirely steady. She let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. Fight with what, Julian? I am trapped in this chair. I can't even walk into the boardroom without looking like a helpless victim. You won't be in that chair forever, I told her. I walked over and knelt down so I was exactly at eye level with her. Listen to me very carefully. I heard Nathaniel on the phone in the hallway. I know exactly who is backing him. I know the name of the private investment firm supplying the capital for the hostile takeover. Serena frowned, her sharp business instincts suddenly flaring up. Who? Which firm? It's Victor's firm, I said, holding her gaze intensely. My father. Her eyes widened in pure shock. For the next hour, I sat across from her and told her absolutely everything. I told her the dark, twisted truth about my wealthy family, the toxic golden child dynamic, the brutal way they threw me out on the street to appease my brother's new fiancé. I told her about Sebastian's ruthless ambition and Clara's disgusting betrayal. I laid all my cards on the table, exposing my deepest, most painful humiliations. I fully expected her to fire me on the spot, to think I was a massive legal liability, or worse, a corporate spy sent by my father to ruin her from the inside. Instead, Serena looked at me with a fierce, burning intensity that sent shivers down my spine. They threw you away, she whispered, processing the immense cruelty of it all. Yes, I said. They threw me away because they thought I was worthless. And Nathaniel is trying to throw you away because he thinks you are broken. So, what are we going to do about it? That specific moment changed everything. We completely stopped being a nurse and a patient. We became a strategic alliance forged in absolute fire. The next 4 days were a chaotic blur of high adrenaline, intense physical pain, and absolute secrecy. During the daytime, Serena played the part of the weak, defeated invalid perfectly. When Valerie visited to snoop around, Serena made sure her voice sounded incredibly tired, asking for extra blankets and painkillers just to throw them off the scent. But at night, the mansion turned into a high-tech war room. Serena brought in her personal corporate attorney, Lawyer Montgomery, an old-school legal shark who hated Nathaniel's unethical business practices just as much as we did. We set up highly secure, encrypted video calls in the basement library to avoid detection. Montgomery traced the complex money trail. We discovered exactly how Nathaniel was planning the coup. He was setting up a private shell company to buy out the voting shares of 3 retiring board members. This shell company was funded entirely by my father's investment firm, with my brother Sebastian acting as the primary legal signatory on the documents. If they get those specific shares, they have the absolute majority. They can legally force you out of the CEO position and liquidate your assets entirely, Montgomery explained through the encrypted video feed, adjusting his glasses. Then we buy the shell company out from under them before the ink dries on Friday, Serena ordered, her brilliant business mind operating at lightning speed. Liquidate my private offshore tech stocks. Transfer the funds immediately. Serena, if you do that, your name will be all over the public registry, Montgomery warned grimly. Nathaniel monitors your accounts. He will see the massive capital movement coming a mile away and he will block the sale through legal injunctions. You desperately need a proxy. Someone entirely off the grid. Someone with zero ties to the tech industry who can legally hold the shares. Serena slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. I shook my head, taking a quick step back. No way. I am a nurse, Serena. I make hourly wages. I don't know anything about corporate takeovers or proxy battles. You are the perfect ghost, Julian, she said, a brilliant, highly dangerous smile spreading across her face. Your toxic family thinks you are a broke loser sleeping on a park bench somewhere. Nathaniel thinks you are just the clumsy medical help. They will not see you coming. You will be the sole owner of the holding company that buys the shares. We will use my money, but your signature. My hands were shaking violently as I signed the incredibly dense legal paperwork Montgomery couriered over that night under the cover of darkness. I was signing my name to hundreds of millions of dollars. But more importantly, I was signing the absolute death warrant for my father's investment deal and my brother's career. By the morning of the emergency board meeting, the trap was fully set. We had weaponized every single one of their arrogant assumptions against them. The sun came up over Cypress Hill, casting a brilliant golden light over the estate. Beatrice, the estate manager who had been secretly helping us coordinate the complex logistics for the last 2 days, brought a heavy garment bag into Serena's bedroom. She unzipped it with a flourish, revealing a stunning, razor-sharp white designer power suit. I stood by the bedroom door in a tailored black suit Serena had purchased for me as she got dressed. When she was finally ready, I rolled her custom wheelchair over to the bed. Serena looked at the chair for a long, silent moment. Then she looked up at me. "I don't need it today." I smiled. I reached into the closet and handed her a sleek, black cane with a heavy silver handle. She gripped it tightly. Her knuckles turned white, and I could clearly see the immense physical pain she was enduring in her eyes, but her posture was absolutely flawless. She was a queen going to reclaim her stolen throne. We walked out to the circular driveway together, taking it one slow step at a time. Winston, the old, incredibly loyal driver, was waiting beside the gleaming black Rolls-Royce. When he saw Serena actually standing on her own 2 feet, walking out of the house, the old man quickly wiped a stray tear from his eye before rushing to open the heavy car door for her. I sat right next to her in the plush back seat as we descended the winding mountain roads toward the bustling financial district. The towering city skyline loomed ahead of us in the morning fog. My stomach was doing aggressive flips, a crazy mix of pure anxiety and intoxicating adrenaline. "Are you ready for this, Julian?" Serena asked, staring intensely out the tinted window at the city she practically owned. "I have been waiting for this exact moment my entire life," I answered, adjusting my tie. The Rolls-Royce pulled up to the massive glass skyscraper of Serena's corporate headquarters. We walked through the grand lobby together. Security guards literally dropped their radios in absolute shock. Receptionists gasped out loud, covering their mouths. Word spread through the building's communication system like wildfire before we even reached the private elevator banks. We stepped into the executive elevator. The heavy doors slid shut, sealing us in. When those metal doors opened on the top floor, the world as my family knew it was going to completely end. The heavy chrome doors of the executive elevator slid shut, sealing Serena and me inside a perfectly silent, wood-paneled box. As the digital floor indicator rapidly climbed toward the penthouse level of the massive glass skyscraper, the physical tension in the air was so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. I stood slightly behind her, watching the numbers climb. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer, but my hands were completely steady. I was no longer the broken, discarded man who had dragged a single suitcase onto a public bus just weeks ago. I was standing next to one of the most powerful women in the state, and we were about to walk into a room full of absolute wolves. I looked down at Serena. She was leaning slightly on her silver cane, taking slow, deep breaths to manage the intense physical pain radiating through her healing spine. But you would never know she was hurting by looking at her face. She wore a mask of pure, untouchable corporate power. Her designer white suit was flawless. Her chin was held high. She looked like a queen preparing to step back onto her stolen throne. "How are you holding up?" I asked quietly, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored black suit. "I have never been better, Julian," Serena replied, her voice smooth and dangerously calm. "Nathaniel thinks he has already won. He thinks I am rotting away in a custom wheelchair back at the estate, heavily medicated and completely unaware of his legal maneuvers. My only regret is that we cannot film the exact look on his face when these doors open." I smiled, a cold, hard smile. "We will just have to settle for the memory." The elevator chimed a soft, expensive-sounding note, and the doors slid open. We stepped out onto the top floor. The entire atmosphere was designed to intimidate. The hallway was lined with massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city skyline, featuring a breathtaking view of the financial district. The floors were polished marble, and the walls were adorned with expensive modern art. But I was not looking at the multimillion-dollar view or the decor. My eyes were locked completely on the massive, frosted glass double doors at the absolute end of the long corridor. Behind those doors was the main executive boardroom. Behind those doors was the culmination of every single lie, every toxic betrayal, and every ounce of staggering arrogance my family had ever weaponized against me. As we walked down the hall, the rhythmic tapping of Serena's silver cane against the marble floor echoed loudly. The executive assistants sitting at the sleek reception desks looked up from their computers. A young woman with an earpiece stood up quickly, her eyes widening in absolute shock as she recognized the CEO, who was supposed to be permanently paralyzed. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to alert the boardroom through the intercom, but Serena just raised a single finger to her lips, ordering complete silence. The assistant immediately sat back down, completely terrified. We approached the boardroom doors. I could hear the muffled sounds of loud laughter, cheering, and the distinct clinking of expensive crystal glasses coming from inside. They were celebrating. They actually thought they had already executed the perfect corporate coup. I reached out, my hands gripping the heavy brass handles. I looked at Serena one last time. She gave me a single, sharp nod of approval. I pushed the heavy doors wide open and we stepped inside. The scene unfolding inside that room was like a perfectly painted Renaissance picture of corporate greed and toxic family arrogance. Nathaniel was standing at the absolute head of the massive mahogany conference table. He was holding a bottle of imported vintage champagne, pouring the bubbling liquid into crystal flutes for the people gathered around him. He had a massive, victorious grin plastered across his face, looking exactly like a man who had just stolen an empire without breaking a sweat. Sitting immediately to his right, looking like he owned the entire skyscraper, was my father, Victor. He was wearing his signature dark navy tailored suit, the one he only wore when he was closing massive deals. He was leaning back comfortably, checking his expensive gold watch, practically salivating over the massive commercial real estate assets his firm was about to officially absorb. And right next to him was Sebastian, my golden child brother. Sebastian was leaning back in an ergonomic leather executive chair with his expensive leather shoes practically resting on the polished mahogany table. He looked so incredibly smug, holding his champagne glass up in a toast. Clara was sitting incredibly close to Sebastian, wearing a brand new, highly flashy diamond necklace that probably cost more than my entire college fund. She was laughing at a joke Nathaniel had just made, looking completely at home among the wealthy elite. To the future of this company, Nathaniel was saying loudly, raising his glass. And to our new controlling partners, may this transition of power be the most profitable venture of our lives. The heavy doors swinging open cut their toxic laughter completely dead. Nathaniel was the very first person to look up toward the entrance. The champagne bottle in his hand literally froze in midair. The expensive bubbling liquor spilled over the rim of the crystal flute, splashing all over the polished wood table and soaking into his expensive silk tie. His jaw dropped open so wide it looked unhinged. He stared at Serena, entirely unable to process the absolute physical impossibility of her standing upright on her own 2 feet. Then Victor turned his head, annoyed by the sudden interruption. His smug, authoritative expression completely vanished the second he saw her. But he was not just looking at Serena. His eyes tracked slightly to the left, and they locked directly onto me. I was standing right beside the billionaire CEO, standing tall, wearing a designer suit that cost more than my entire annual salary at the physical therapy clinic, looking my father dead in the eye with absolute defiance. Sebastian actually dropped his champagne glass. It hit the edge of the mahogany table and shattered onto the plush carpet, sending shards of crystal and alcohol everywhere. Clara let out a sharp, audible gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in pure shock. "Julian!" Sebastian choked out, his voice cracking violently like a terrified teenager caught doing something illegal. He scrambled to take his feet off the table, nearly tipping his chair backward. "What the hell are you doing here? How did you get past security? Are you delivering coffee to the executives?" I did not say a single word. I did not need to defend my presence. I let the absolute silence in the room stretch out, making them stew in their own mounting panic. Serena walked slowly, deliberately, into the center of the massive room. The sharp, rhythmic tapping of her silver cane against the floor was the only sound cutting through the dead-silent boardroom. Every single executive, legal counsel, and board member seated around the table stared in absolute, breathless shock. Serena did not stop walking until she reached the exact opposite end of the table from Nathaniel. She stood tall at the head of the room, firmly refusing to take a seat, physically forcing every single person in the room to look up at her. "Good morning, everyone," Serena said. Her voice was perfectly calm, incredibly steady, and razor-sharp. "I deeply apologize for being slightly late to this emergency meeting. I was taking a long walk through the city this morning. It is an absolutely beautiful morning in the financial district, don't you think, Nathaniel?" Nathaniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. His face turned an incredibly ugly shade of pale gray. He scrambled to put the dripping champagne bottle down on a coaster. "Serena, you are here. You are walking. The official medical reports from your doctors stated you were permanently paralyzed. The medical board said you were entirely physically unfit to continue your duties as chief executive officer. The doctors gave an initial, highly cautious prognosis based on immediate trauma, Nathaniel," Serena replied smoothly, completely commanding the energy of the entire room. "And you, being the incredibly opportunistic, predatory vulture that you are, decided to use my personal medical tragedy to initiate a hostile corporate takeover of my life's work. You called this emergency board meeting behind my back to push a legally binding vote of no confidence based entirely on my health. Well, here I am. I am standing. I am fully capable of running this company. So, I suggest you sit down, shut your mouth, and explain exactly why you are trying to illegally sell my company to an outside investment firm." Victor stood up abruptly, trying desperately to assert his usual dominant alpha male presence, trying to reclaim control of the narrative. He quickly buttoned his suit jacket, glaring at me with pure venom before turning his attention entirely to Serena. "Miss Serena, let us not get overly emotional and dramatic here," Victor said, using his deep, patronizing boardroom voice. "This is a purely business transaction. Nathaniel has the absolute best interests of the shareholders and the overall market valuation in mind. This company desperately needs strong, active, visible public leadership. My investment firm is simply providing the necessary capital for a smooth transition of corporate power that is already well underway. We have legally secured the necessary proxy votes. We are buying the controlling voting shares from the 3 retiring board members today. The contracts are signed. It is a completely done deal. You being able to walk does not change the financial mathematics of a majority vote." Sebastian chimed in, puffing out his chest, trying to sound like a highly important executive, though his hands were still visibly shaking as he leaned against the table. "Exactly. My father is completely right. We initiated the massive wire transfer of funds this morning from our primary corporate business accounts directly to the holding company executing the purchase. You are outvoted, Serena. It really does not matter if you can walk with a cane. The math does not lie. My father and I legally control this board of directors now. You need to step down gracefully." Clara looked at me with a sickening mixture of intense confusion and utter disgust, clearly trying to mentally calculate how the completely broke loser she had just dumped had somehow snuck his way into the middle of a billionaire's corporate boardroom. I just smiled at them. It was a slow, incredibly cold, completely merciless smile. I reached down into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of stamped legal documents. I tossed them onto the center of the polished mahogany table with a heavy, satisfying thud that made Nathaniel flinch. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Sebastian," I said, my voice echoing powerfully in the large room, completely unshaken by my father's glaring eyes. "The math absolutely does not lie, but your math is completely, catastrophically wrong. Victor's face turned completely crimson with absolute fury. The veins in his neck were practically popping out against his collar. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "Julian, you insolent, ungrateful brat." Victor snarled, completely dropping his polished professional facade in front of the entire board of directors. "I told you exactly what would happen if you ever tried to interfere with my business again. I will completely strip your remaining inheritance. I will drag you through a defamation lawsuit so fast your head will spin. I will tie you up in civil court until you are bankrupt. Security. Someone call security and get this arrogant nurse out of this building immediately. I highly suggest you do not do that, Victor." A new, incredibly authoritative voice boomed from the back of the room. The frosted glass doors opened again. Gareth, the oldest, wealthiest, and most universally respected member of the board of directors, stepped into the room. Right behind him was lawyer Montgomery, carrying his own heavy leather briefcase and looking incredibly smug. Gareth walked past Victor and looked directly at Nathaniel with absolute, unmasked disgust. "Nathaniel, when you brought this emergency buyout proposal to the board last week, you explicitly claimed it was an internal corporate restructuring designed to protect our commercial real estate assets and tech patents from market volatility. You completely failed to mention to the board that you were secretly selling the controlling voting shares to a predatory outside investment firm run by Victor here. That is a massive violation of your non-disclosure agreement and a direct breach of corporate trust." "The shares are already sold," Nathaniel shouted, completely losing his perfectly crafted composure, his voice cracking with panic. "The private shell company executed the purchase at exactly 9 o'clock this morning when the markets opened. It is completely legal. It is legally binding. Victor's holding company officially owns the voting rights. You cannot undo a completed financial transaction just because you feel betrayed." Lawyer Montgomery stepped forward smoothly, calmly adjusting his glasses. He walked over to the table, picked up the thick stack of papers I had thrown down, and slid them directly across the mahogany wood toward Victor. "Actually, Nathaniel, that is exactly where you made a catastrophic, career-ending legal error," Lawyer Montgomery said, a wide smile spreading across his face. "The shares were indeed legally purchased by a private shell company this morning. The transaction cleared successfully. But it was absolutely not Victor's company that made the purchase." Victor snatched the heavy stack of legal papers off the table. His eyes frantically scanned the top page, reading the bold print of the finalized contracts. I watched the exact, beautiful moment his entire arrogant world completely collapsed. The color completely drained from his face in a matter of seconds, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. His hands started shaking so violently that the papers rustled loudly in the quiet room. He dropped the documents back onto the table as if they were literally on fire. Sebastian leaned over quickly to read the papers, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. What does it say, Dad? Did the wire transfer bounce? Did the bank flag the massive withdrawal? What is going on?" "The wire transfer from your investment firm was blocked by an emergency legal injunction filed by this office yesterday afternoon," I said clearly, making absolutely sure every single person in the room heard my words. "The controlling shares were purchased by a completely different private holding company. A company that paid in pure, untraceable cash, exactly 5 minutes before the market opened this morning." I walked slowly around the massive table, listening to my own footsteps on the carpet. I stopped right behind Sebastian's expensive leather chair. I looked down at him. "Tell me, Sebastian," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Read the document. Who is legally listed as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of that private holding company?" Sebastian leaned closer to the paperwork. He read the name printed clearly on the legal document. He physically choked on his own breath. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. He looked like he had just seen a monster. "Julian, you?" Sebastian whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You bought the controlling shares? How? With what money? You were sleeping on a terrible couch. You are a nurse. You don't have this kind of capital. I am the legal proxy, I said, leaning down so my voice was right next to his ear, making sure he felt every ounce of my victory. And as the sole legal owner of the controlling voting shares of this corporation, I have absolute, undeniable veto power over any board decision, which means your pathetic hostile takeover is officially dead in the water. Your investment firm just wasted millions of dollars in non-refundable legal fees for a massive corporate deal that absolutely never existed. Clara stared at me, completely paralyzed in her chair. The devastating reality of the situation was slowly, painfully dawning on her greedy mind. She had brutally dumped me just 2 weeks before our wedding because she firmly believed I had no future, no money, and no prospects. She had traded me for the golden child with the fancy car and the corner office. And now, I was standing in front of her holding the absolute legal keys to a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, while the man she chose was rapidly realizing he had just bankrupted his entire family. Serena took complete control of the room once again, pointing the silver tip of her cane directly at Nathaniel's chest. Nathaniel, you have severely breached your fiduciary duty to this corporation and its shareholders, Serena said coldly, her voice echoing with absolute authority. You actively attempted to defraud this company, lie to the board of directors, and orchestrate a hostile corporate coup using unapproved outside capital. Gareth, as the CEO, I call for an immediate, legally binding vote to terminate Nathaniel from his position as co-founder, effective this very second, and completely strip him of his golden parachute severance package due to proven, documented gross misconduct. The board members, immediately realizing the massive shift in power and wanting to save their own lucrative positions, all immediately raised their hands. The vote was completely unanimous. You are officially fired, Nathaniel, Serena said coldly, not showing a single ounce of mercy. Security will now escort you directly to your office. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack a single cardboard box with your personal items before you are permanently escorted off the premises. If you attempt to contact any of our clients, my legal team will bury you in litigation. Nathaniel looked like he was genuinely going to vomit. He stumbled backward, bumping into the wall, completely defeated. His entire reputation and career in the tech industry were in absolute ruins. 2 massive security guards stepped into the room and grabbed him by the arms, dragging him out into the hallway. I turned my attention entirely back to my father. Victor was staring at me like I was a complete stranger. The confident, terrifying patriarch who had ruthlessly controlled my entire life was gone, replaced by a desperate, ruined old man. You ruined my firm, Victor whispered hoarsely, gripping the edge of the table to keep his balance. Do you have any idea what you have done to this family, Julian? I massively leveraged our commercial real estate portfolio to fund this buyout. I leveraged Sebastian's trust funds. I took out massive short-term loans against the family estate. We are completely exposed to the market. We are financially ruined. You ruined yourself, Victor, I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy or familial warmth. You threw me out onto the street without a single second thought because I was a slight inconvenience to your perfect public image. You threatened to withhold my inheritance. You threatened me with a lawsuit over rent money. You thought you could just erase me from existence because I didn't fit your narrative. But you forgot one crucial thing, Dad. You taught me exactly how ruthless the corporate business world is at every single Thanksgiving dinner we ever had. I just finally applied your lessons directly to you. Sebastian stood up quickly, trying to act tough, trying to salvage his pride in front of Clara. But tears of absolute panic were welling up in his eyes. You can't do this to us, Julian. We are your family. I am your flesh and blood brother. You have to transfer the shares to us to cover the loans. You completely stopped being my brother the exact day you stole Clara and watched me get kicked out of my own home onto the sidewalk. I replied smoothly, buttoning my suit jacket. Have a lot of fun paying off your massive luxury car loans without a 6-figure executive salary, Sebastian. Oh, and Clara? I looked directly at my ex-fiancée, who was now physically trembling in her chair, tears ruining her expensive makeup. I truly hope that brand new diamond necklace was worth destroying our entire relationship. Because Sebastian is going to have to pawn it by next week just to pay his rent. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate aftermath of the boardroom bloodbath was chaotic, to say the absolute least. The private security team physically escorted Victor, Sebastian, and Clara out of the building through the service elevator to avoid causing a massive public scene in the main lobby. Serena and I stayed behind in the executive suite with lawyer Montgomery and his legal team for several exhausting hours to finalize the complex transfer paperwork and secure the corporate firewall against any digital retaliation from Nathaniel's loyalists. We spent hours locked in that office, ensuring every single legal loophole was completely closed and sealed shut. When we finally finished signing the last stack of documents, we took the private elevator down to the VIP underground parking garage. We were both completely physically exhausted, but we were riding a massive, euphoric wave of adrenaline. Winston, the loyal driver, had the Rolls-Royce waiting for us, the engine purring softly in the cool underground air. But as we approached the luxury vehicle, 2 figures frantically stepped out from the dark shadows near a massive concrete support pillar. It was my father, Victor, and my mother, Diana. They had somehow bypassed the lower-level security checkpoint and waited in the freezing, damp garage for hours just to intercept me. Diana ran forward instantly, genuine tears streaming down her face, her expensive designer makeup completely ruined and smeared across her cheeks. She reached out and aggressively grabbed my arm. "Julian! Oh, my sweet boy, Julian! Please, you have to stop and listen to us!" Diana cried, her voice echoing loudly in the empty garage. I physically ripped my arm away from her frantic grip, stepping protectively in front of Serena. "Do not touch me. How did you get down here? Security was supposed to remove you from the premises." Victor stepped forward from the shadows. His usual arrogant, terrifying posture was completely gone. He looked 10 years older than he had just a few hours ago in the boardroom. He was hunched over, his tie loosened, looking incredibly desperate. "Julian, son, please," Victor begged, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "You have to legally undo this transaction. You hold the controlling shares. You have the power to restructure the deal and sell them back to my holding company at a reduced rate. If this massive takeover officially fails, my investment firm goes completely bankrupt by Friday morning. The banks will immediately seize the family home. The neighborhood HOA will have an absolute field day dragging our reputation through the mud. We will lose absolutely everything we have spent 30 years building." "You already lost absolutely everything the day you packed my bags in those suitcases and kicked me to the curb," I said, my voice echoing coldly off the damp concrete walls. "You lost your son. We made a terrible mistake," Diana wailed, trying to grab my hand again, acting like a desperate child. "We were just trying to do what we thought was best for the family portfolio." Clara aggressively manipulated Sebastian. "She is a vicious gold digger. We clearly see that now. You are our real son, our own flesh and blood. You cannot legally let your own parents face a massive bankruptcy lawsuit and lose their retirement accounts." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing in my chest but a cold, heavy sense of pity. "You only see me as a loving son right now because I am the one holding the massive checkbook. When I had absolutely nothing, I was an embarrassment to the family name. I was garbage to be thrown out. You didn't care if I starved on the street or slept in a shelter. So no, Diana, I am absolutely not saving your corrupt investment firm. I am not bailing out Sebastian's trust fund. The catastrophic financial consequences of your immense greed are entirely yours to bear." I turned my back on them without another word, opened the heavy car door for Serena, and got in beside her. As Winston expertly drove us up the steep concrete ramp and out into the bright city light, I looked out the rearview mirror one last time. My parents were standing completely alone in the dark garage, clinging to each other, completely ruined by their own toxic, unforgivable actions. It was the absolute last time I ever spoke to them or saw their faces. 6 incredibly fast months passed. The corporate dust finally settled. Serena fully reclaimed total control of her tech company, driving the stock prices higher than they had ever been in the history of the corporation. She continued her grueling physical therapy every single morning, and by the end of the beautiful California fall, she was walking completely unassisted, entirely free of the silver cane. As for my toxic family, the universe's karma hit them like a massive, unstoppable freight train. Victor's investment firm collapsed completely under the crushing weight of the failed hostile takeover and the massive, unpayable debt he had accumulated. The banks ruthlessly foreclosed on all their lucrative commercial real estate properties. They lost the family mansion. Sebastian was immediately fired from his high-paying executive job when the firm liquidated, and because he had blown through his entire college fund and drained his savings trying to keep up his incredibly wealthy, flashy lifestyle, the bank formally repossessed his shiny silver Porsche right out of his driveway. I had moved on entirely. Serena had generously invested a massive amount of capital to open a state-of-the-art physical therapy and rehabilitation clinic right in the heart of the city, and she officially put me in charge of the entire operation as the head medical director. I was finally using my medical degree to build something incredible, helping people recover from the same devastating injuries Serena had faced. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my large oak desk in my private office at the clinic, quietly reviewing patient medical files and finalizing staff payroll. The front desk receptionist knocked urgently on the door and said someone was aggressively demanding to see me without a scheduled appointment, refusing to leave the lobby. I sighed, stood up, and walked out to the main waiting room to handle the disruption. And there she was, Clara. She looked absolutely terrible. Her expensive, tailored designer clothes were completely gone, replaced by cheap, wrinkled fabrics that looked like they came from a discount rack at Walmart. Her normally perfect hair was a messy, unwashed bun. The flashy diamond necklace Sebastian had bought her was noticeably missing from her neck. "Julian," she sobbed the absolute second she saw me, rushing toward me across the lobby. "Julian, please, you have to talk to me in private." I stood my ground, crossing my arms firmly over my chest, refusing to let her get close. "What exactly do you want, Clara? You are making a scene in my professional medical clinic. Sebastian is completely broke," she cried loudly, completely unashamed of exposing her terrible gold-digging motives to a room full of staring patients. "He is drowning in massive credit card debt. And worse, I found out he was cheating on me with some cheap real estate agent the entire time we were together planning the wedding. He used me. He completely ruined my life." She reached out desperately, trying to touch my chest, tears streaming down her face. "I made a massive, unforgivable mistake, Julian. I was so confused. I was terrified about our future finances and paying off student loans. But I always truly loved you. Only you. We can completely start over. You are incredibly successful now. You own this massive clinic. We can finally have the beautiful wedding we originally planned." I looked at her, truly, genuinely amazed by her sheer, unadulterated audacity. She wasn't actually sorry she broke my heart in that coffee shop. She wasn't sorry she betrayed me. She was just incredibly sorry she bet all her chips on the wrong horse and lost her meal ticket. I smiled gently, a look of complete, unshakable closure washing over my face. "Clara, the absolute best thing you ever did for me in our entire relationship was slide that velvet ring box back across the table. Because if you hadn't left me for my brother, I never would have been forced to find out what I am actually worth in this world. Now, please leave my clinic immediately before I call the local police and have you formally escorted out and charged with trespassing." She stood there frozen in the lobby, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, completely and utterly humiliated in front of my entire staff. I turned around, walked calmly back into my private office, and firmly shut the heavy wooden door, locking her completely and permanently in my past where she belonged. With my incredibly toxic family completely and permanently removed from the picture, and Clara finally gone for good, my life transformed in ways I never thought were actually possible. The massive Cypress Hill estate no longer felt like a cold, isolated, terrifying prison of secrets. Felt like a warm, inviting, real home. Serena and I had crossed a massive, undeniable line during the intense corporate war, and we absolutely never looked back. The strict professional boundary between a hired medical nurse and a billionaire patient had dissolved completely, replaced by a deep, beautiful, undeniable partnership based on absolute trust, fierce loyalty, and profound mutual respect. We spent our quiet evenings cooking dinner together in the massive gourmet kitchen, laughing out loud when I accidentally burned the expensive organic vegetables or spilled wine on the marble counters. We spent our peaceful weekends walking for miles along the private, secluded beach located directly behind the massive estate. The incredibly intimidating woman who had once screamed at me to get out of her gym on my very first night was now the single person who grounded me the most, the person who consistently pushed me to be the absolute best version of myself. I wasn't just a hired caretaker anymore, hiding in the staff quarters. I was a true equal. Exactly 1 full year after the terrible day, I was brutally thrown out of my apartment by my own mother. Serena and I took a long, relaxing weekend trip down the beautiful California coast. We were celebrating the highly successful grand opening of our second major rehabilitation clinic. The warm evening sun was slowly setting over the vast Pacific Ocean, casting a brilliant, breathtaking array of orange, pink, and deep purple light across the crashing water. The sandy beach was completely empty, providing a perfectly secluded moment, the rhythmic, soothing sound of the crashing waves providing a beautiful, natural soundtrack. Serena was walking closely beside me, completely free of her silver cane, her bare feet sinking into the wet sand, the cool ocean breeze blowing gently through her dark hair. She stopped walking and looked out at the endless horizon, taking a deep, contented breath of the fresh, salty air. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked softly, keeping her eyes fixed on the sunset, not needing to clarify who the word "them" actually meant. I reached down and gently took her hand, interlacing our fingers together, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. "Sometimes," I admitted honestly, looking out at the water, "I hear through the professional grapevine that Victor is facing yet another massive civil lawsuit regarding a completely botched commercial real estate deal, and Sebastian is currently working a terrible retail job at the mall trying desperately to pay off his mounting legal debts. But honestly, it doesn't hurt me anymore. The deep, burning anger is completely gone. They are just total strangers who happen to share my DNA. They hold absolutely no power over my happiness. Family isn't always bound by blood, Julian," Serena said softly, turning to look up at me with those incredibly fierce, beautiful, intelligent eyes. "True family is the people who stand firmly by your side when you are completely, utterly broken. The people who are willing to fight for you when you don't have the strength to fight for yourself." "I know," I said, my heart completely full, overflowing with a profound sense of gratitude I had never experienced before. I gently let go of her hand for just a moment. I reached deep into the inside pocket of my light jacket. My hands were shaking slightly, but absolutely not from fear or anxiety. It was pure, overwhelming anticipation. I pulled out a small, simple, dark blue velvet box. It wasn't incredibly flashy. It didn't contain a massive, gaudy diamond bought with an inherited trust fund. It was a beautiful, highly elegant, custom-designed sapphire ring that I had proudly bought with my own hard-earned salary from the medical clinic we had built together from the ground up. I took a slow step back and slowly, deliberately got down on one knee right there in the cool, wet sand. Serena gasped loudly, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in shock, tears of absolute joy instantly welling up in her beautiful eyes. "Serena," I said, looking up at the incredible woman who had completely saved my life while I was trying my absolute best to save hers. Exactly a year ago, I lost absolutely everything I thought I wanted in this world. I was completely empty, broken, and alone. But taking that terrible job, walking into that gym in the middle of the night, and fighting that massive corporate war alongside you, it gave me a true purpose. You showed me exactly what true, undeniable strength actually looks like. You taught me how to stand on my own 2 feet, and I helped you stand on yours. We survived the absolute worst together. I never want to walk another single day on this earth without you firmly by my side. Will you marry me? She didn't hesitate for a single, fleeting second. She dropped down to her knees right there in the wet sand with me, not caring about her expensive clothes, wrapped her arms tightly around my neck, and kissed me with absolutely everything she had. Yes, she whispered happily against my lips, laughing and crying at the exact same time. Absolutely, unequivocally, yes. I slid the beautiful sapphire ring onto her left finger. It was an absolutely perfect fit. Looking back on everything now, from the terrible betrayal in the coffee shop to the beautiful sunset on the beach, I realized that the universe has a very funny, ironic way of perfectly balancing the scales of justice. My incredibly toxic parents and my arrogant golden child brother tried to completely and utterly destroy me. They tried to permanently erase my future just to protect their own fragile, pathetic egos and their massive bank accounts. But their ultimate, heartbreaking betrayal was the exact catalyst that violently pushed me into the greatest, most profound blessing of my entire life. I lost a fake, incredibly toxic family, but I successfully built a real, massive empire with a brilliant woman who truly loves me exactly for who I am. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic, manipulative family? Have you ever had to completely cut off the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally because they only used you for their own selfish financial gain? Share your personal story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I deeply want to know how you successfully found your own profound healing and incredible success after the storm. And please, don't forget to absolutely smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next incredible journey. Thank you so much for listening, and stay strong.